Walt Disney once said, "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." I think a lot of people wish it was really that easy, but I think sometimes it can be. Hey, this is KB. I'm a technologist, thought leader, and self-published author. I've been publishing ebooks, print books, audio, video, and other content online since 2015. I stumbled quite a bit, tried many different types of content, marketing strategies, software tools, and social media streams. Now I'm here to help you learn from my mistakes and find inspiration along the way. We'll take a journey together to leverage your content, dive into practical tips, and test out actionable strategies that move you from posts to profit. This is the Self-Pub Empire Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about psychology's top tips for starting your creative work. Part one. I think we're going to have two parts to this. There's a lot of topics. There's a lot of research that was done really about starting anything, starting new projects, working on things you like to work on, and overcoming the tendency not to start. And that can be very difficult. According to a survey conducted by Small Biz Genius, 53% of businesses say that starting a project is the most challenging phase of it. So we're going to talk about that today. What are the top tips to help you get going and get started? My journey that I hope you can come with me on is the fact that I was started to write books. They're technical books. They're not novels. I personally feel novels are more difficult, but writing technical books, where do you start? It was difficult for me. I started a long time ago, and I think some of these tips were really great. I kind of wish I would have known many of these when I got started, but I didn't. I knew a few of them, and I think they're going to be really helpful for you. So let's jump into it. Number one, set a clear intention. I think this is really important. I remember some of the books that are out there. One of them I believe was called First Things First. Begin with the end in mind, came from Think and Grow Rich. Those are really setting a clear intention. It's really helpful because you're clarifying your purpose and your vision for the creative work. I think for some folks, it might be tougher, particularly from a really artistic type of work, sketching, drawing, those kinds of things. You might not know where you're going with it at first, but really take it back a step and look at it from the perspective of what kind of work am I trying to do, and then let the flow happen from that. So you're setting the intention of trying to get something out on paper. You've picked your medium and so on and so forth, and we'll talk about some of those things as well. But clarifying your purpose and vision for the creative work is definitely step one. From the book's perspective, once we got clear, myself and my friend who was working on this with me as my editor, once we got very clear in saying, hey, this is the market for this, this is where the seniors need some help, which is smartphones, because they're saying, I wish I had a manual. There's a story there. I'll pass it on some other time in a different podcast. But we had that purpose to say we can come up with something, a technical book to help seniors understand their smartphones. So that's the second part of this is why would you want to pursue the project? So we had a vision, we had a purpose. We wanted to help seniors with their technology. And that was really where we started in this whole thing. What impact is another thing to think about. What impact do you hope to achieve with it? Again, for our books, we really wanted to help seniors who had the problem of saying that we don't have a manual for this. We don't understand it. And if you think about it from a smartphone, especially these days, you get the smartphone, it goes through some basic tutorial things at the start of the screens, and then you're kind of on your own. But you can always go back, but you don't necessarily know how to do that. For seniors, that was very difficult. So that was definitely the impact we wanted to achieve with that. So the intention itself really is that guiding principle. So if you have that intention, you have what that purpose is, it's your guidepost. Does it align with what you're trying to do? And the example, again, I saw with the self-publishing of the books and the Senior Dummies books that you can check out on the Self-Pub Empire website. If you want to take a look at that, you can tell that the guidepost was our guiding principle was to make it really easy for seniors with large print, really big pictures, trying to be really clear with diagrams and things like that, with large arrows and easy to use instructions, very basic, very step by step. That was the intention. That was the guiding principle. It helped craft a book and helped set some things that we wanted to set, such as the size of the print, which is actually a very large book size. We also knew some of the limitations involved. And so that helped with those guideposts as well. Was it in? Was it out? Should we do it? Should we not? Setting those intentions, that clear intention really, really helped. Okay. Number 2, create a conducive environment. What does that mean? This really has to do with your workspace setup, right? This is where you do your creative work, whatever that is. Some people would be on the streets, I guess, with their creative work, doing work with their phones, their camera phones, and doing TikToks. I've seen TikToks where people are interviewing other people and on the street and so on and so forth. But really, then their conducive environment is to make sure they have enough people around to ask those questions. For me, really, it was quiet work, writing a book, designating that workspace and making sure that I'm mentally free for creative work, free from distractions. Sometimes clutter. Science and psychology says clutter is bad. I'm not sure about that personally. Sometimes I certainly have a lot of clutter, but there's the things that I like to have around me. In particular, science also says you should surround yourself with inspiring and motivational elements. Well, I'm not sure that then that qualifies as clutter. I don't think it does. But what are the things you like to have around you when you do your kind of work? I will say for writing, I like to have a nice laptop and I like to go to a coffee shop and put my headphones in. There's the music that I'll do and talk about those kinds of things as well. And I like to have that. That's conducive to my environment. But what's really interesting about that is I also have the sounds of the coffee shop in the background. That's actually really useful for me. And I got used to that when I was doing schoolwork years ago. To do the kind of schoolwork that I was doing required a laptop and headphones and those kinds of things. That actually, I kind of got used to that. I really enjoyed that. So what kind of things can you have around you that can inspire you without distracting you? I think music is probably one of the more popular things that people are going to talk about and say, hey, what kind of thing do I like to have? I like to have music. And hey, you know what? Why don't you put that in the comments? Want to comment on that? What kind of things do you like having in your environment to make it so it's conducive to your creative work? I can see YouTube creators having a nice camera setup and a fun background that's conducive to their work. I can see that, some of the really popular ones out there, PewDiePie, Jacksepticeye, these are all gamer guys. Markiplier and so on and so forth. They all have that kind of fun background kind of things. And some more of the background you see and some you don't. I think that's interesting as well. But again, I think music tends to be for quiet endeavors, those kinds of things. Music tends to be the most popular one that I would say for creating that environment around you. Psychology says number 3, establish a routine. I actually think this is probably one of the most important things. I think the environment, less so than establishing a routine. Setting a clear intention, I think, deserves to be number 1. I almost put this as number 2, establishing a routine. But a routine is about consistency. And I'm going to talk about that probably quite a bit more as we go on with this journey together for online creators. Consistency is key. And I talked about in the past the content value stream and putting those things out there on a consistent basis. But likewise, when you're creating work, you need a consistent schedule for working on your creative endeavor. Somehow, some way. For writing, it was early in the morning for me most of the time. And then, of course, some evenings to work in the coffee shop, just like I said. A routine of being prepared and ready to go. That routine can signal your brain it's time to go into that state of focused creativity, also called flow. I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. But there's a quote that I like to throw out there. I thought it was John Grisham. It's not. It was attributed to an unknown author that wrote supposedly over 70 novels. It's been requoted many, many times. And this phrase was, the question was, how do you make your work? How do you get this, productivity level? And the answer was 200 crappy words a day. That's it. And all that really means is don't worry about certain things about what you're putting down or what you're creating. Be consistent and keep putting it out there. And certainly if you're using social media, being consistent and putting out there is really important. And that's part of your routine as well. Not just the creative work for it, but also how you're doing it. That's what my experience has been. And certainly when writing the books, that was where I flourished the most, is really handling just the content creation pieces in the morning, early morning when it was quiet at home, and all the other things, the editing, graphic design, movement of pieces and rework and so on and so forth. Those are good activities outside of that time frame in the evenings and things like that, because those are much more easily interruptible and not such a big deal. Just pouring out your brain onto something, 200 crappy words a day. Routine is really important. Being consistent is very important. That to me holds true with this. It certainly sounds true to me from the psychology pieces that I've read. And I think it will work for you too. That's how you get to it. Okay, number 4. And by the way, since we're creeping up on halfway through this first part 1, we have roughly 14 of these to go through based on all the research that I've done out there for this kind of information. But number 4, so we're almost halfway through here, engaging in pre-work rituals. I think this one's interesting, and there's a lot of studies on this too that I've read about bedtime rituals. How do you fall asleep? And if you change up your sleep patterns all the time, that doesn't lead to better sleep. I believe for work, it's the same thing. And that's, I think, where the research holds true. Your brain thrives on routine a lot of times to help you. I remember reading a study regarding the brain and routine. And most of the time, the brain really wants to go with routine because it helps offload processing to other things. So if you are in a constant state of unknown, also called stress, your mind gets fatigued because it's trying to adapt all the time. I digress, though. I think that's a little bit more deep than we want to go here. But really, again, for pre-work, what's your ritual? What activities do you do to help transition your brain into a creative mode? Some people use meditation. I never did. Walking, listening to music. Once again, music can do both of these things. I like it. Rush being my favorite band. That's what I used. You can also add calming your mind somehow. Again, breathing exercises. The rituals serve really as a mental cue to start that creative work and help enter that focused state again a little more easily, again, called flow as well. So the ritual itself provides an opportunity to clear your mind of the distractions and kind of prime yourself for that imaginative thinking where your brain can shift. So a lot of times this imaginative creative work, from what I've read, and certainly I've experienced myself, I'll go back to flow in a minute, but really is about using different parts of your brain rather than the day-to-day left-brained, I'm driving a car, I'm doing this, I'm doing work. Creativity a lot of times stems from the right brain. And I can actually speak to this specifically because I used to do a lot of sketching and drawing in my spare time when I was much younger and I had a lot more spare time. And time itself, when I was doing it, this was called, really now we would call it flow. Time itself passed by and I had no idea. I would lose complete track of time. The right brain would take over. I would be in the moment and creativity would flow very easily. And it was fun. It was very enjoyable. And I think that gives your left side of the brain a little bit more time to not work and give it a little time to have some downtime. So that kind of can clear your mind and it primes you and gets you into that imaginative thinking. And so what is flow? I've mentioned it a couple of times now. The researcher, I'm going to try to pronounce the name, Mihaly, I think, and I can't pronounce Mihaly's last name, coined the term way back in 1970. And it's that focused concentration and attention. It has been described as feeling like flowing like water or flowing up in a river, those kinds of things. And anybody who's experienced or does drawing or sketching and has moved into the right brain to do that work, I think you're going to know much more clearly about what it is I'm talking about. But really anybody who's trying to do something creative and they're in the flow and they're feeling that is that concentration and the creativity starts to go. And there's a lot of discussion and research on this, I know, out there, but we're just scratching the surface. So I think if you want to go out and Google that, it's flow and what does that mean for your brain? Give that a look. There's a lot of information about that. All right. Number 5, overcoming the fear of failure. Oh no, if I can't do this right, why should I even start at all? Unfortunately, that is the thoughts or feelings that I think a lot of us have. So you have to accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes. And facing that challenge is part of the creative process. The cool part is in most endeavors, you can go back and edit. It's really okay to not have it be correct the first way. So accepting failure or problems or challenges as part of the journey can really alleviate that anxiety and promote that innovation and allow you to get started rather than I'm not going to start because I'm too afraid. Fear is very powerful, which I'll talk about in a second. But understanding that really it's a part of the creative process is that what one consider failure, that even if you did it, no one would listen. And here I am, I'm doing a podcast. I could be doing these and no one could listen. And this may never work. Is that really a failure? I accept the fact that this could be part of what would consider a failure, but I enjoyed it. So I don't really care. I'm going to start getting going on it. And of course, you have to accept the fact that there are going to be setbacks. There's going to be opportunities for learning. And if you're not an expert, that's okay. You really, once again, and I say this over and over again, you have to start somewhere. Experts didn't start out as experts. They started out as students. And sometimes it's better to be a student than it is to be an expert because a student is willing to learn. Sometimes experts are not willing to learn and they get caught up in doing things the way they always do. In addition, fear is really by far really a huge influencer on behavior. Studies have shown people are much more afraid of loss than they are excited about gain. And that's why advertisements a lot of times, anytime ads that you see, a lot of times they focus on telling someone what they might suffer from rather than what the positive benefits are. So if you might suffer from this, if you don't do this, rather than this is what you're going to gain, if you do this or buy this, it works in advertising. People do fear loss more so than they really are excited about gain. It's human nature. And I think that everyone pretty much has that baked into them. So be aware of your fear and use it to overcome that, acknowledge it, move forward. The next one is really important, and I want to talk about this one, I think, more in a future podcast, and it's really starting with small steps. So number 6, starting with small steps. Breaking things down. So research by the Harvard Business Review indicated that setting specific, achievable goals increases motivation and productivity by 37%. I don't know about you, but 37% is pretty close to 50%. And being able to be, again, as half as productive as you are now, that feels pretty good. So if you can break things down into small pieces, and I'm going to talk about this, like I said, I think this is a great topic for another podcast, really all by itself, and particularly around creation and your intellectual property landscape, your content value generation, and how to get your posts out there and move from posts to profits and breaking that down. I think that's a great topic in the future. And this will help you get started. What is your small steps? What are all the steps that you have to do? Cut it up into small pieces and take it one step at a time. You focus on the small steps. You can manage your workload. You can decide what you want to work on. You can build motivation as you make progress. And you can also really accept and understand that you are making progress because you can measure it because I did this one thing. I did this one next thing. Now I've done the next thing. I did one page on my website. I did one video. I did one podcast. I did one introduction to the podcast. It also allows you to have greater clarity in identifying and addressing challenges that you might run into, and you have an organized and successful maybe start to your creative endeavor or start to your online presence or start to your website and implementation of how to move from posts to profit. That really can help you a lot. And I think that this is a great topic. What do they always say? I don't know who to attribute this to, but how do you need an elephant? It's really one bite at a time. I think people laugh at me when I say that, but it is true. The elephant is whatever it is that you want to roll out there. And you can do this in small pieces and get started. Same thing with starting a podcast. There were small pieces that I did there. Starting the website, small pieces. And really, I've done just one page at a time on the website. You can go check it out at selfpubempire.com. It's been piece by piece, one bite at a time. If you started with me back when I first released this episode, or right now when I release this episode, and you take a look at the website now in this space and time versus the next space and time, or you might come back to it, it's going to be different. I'm just taking everything one step at a time. And I'm documenting my way through it too, which is going to allow me to help talk about that. One thing, one bite at a time. You can get started, and that will help you. Break it down. It's okay. And then take that one piece and start there. So number 7, we're going to get close to the first half here of our psychology top tips for starting our creative work together. Number 7 is leveraging inspiration triggers. I thought this was kind of an interesting one that was out there that's relatively popular. So there's a study by the Pew Research Center that shows that 80% of online content creators, they find motivation from observing others' work. I am absolutely 100% no different than anybody else. There are folks that I check out online. How are they doing things? What inspirational pieces can they provide for me? Insights and thoughts. And there's definitely quite a few out there that I've seen that I really enjoy. From an inspiration perspective, Gary V, that's Gary Vaynerchuk, he's out there quite a bit. He definitely does a lot of speaking, public speaking and things like that. And he's like an online media mogul, really. A great story. He started out within his dad's liquor store doing that. And he started to put YouTube videos out there about different kinds of wine. And he called it the Wine Library and started to educate people in very no nonsense way when YouTube started to come out. And he really just put the videos out there. Low production, not a great camera, but he put it out there. He has a book out, and let me finish that story. I apologize. He actually got to a certain point where the liquor store, really came alive because of the videos, and people would come there a long time from a long distance away. It's because they felt educated and they felt an affinity towards the place, to the store, and he would help people and so on and so forth. He did this for quite a while, honestly, getting more and more, and people approaching and going and turning the business really into a huge, huge reseller of wine. And he then turned around and started an online media company because he felt that he could do that, and people started asking him to speak publicly. And he's done that as well. And so he really talks about a lot of positivity. Now he's a very motivational speaker, positivity and things like that. And his VaynerMedia continues to function as his main business arm. And it's really, I think, quite large at this point. The interesting part about that, the inspiration that I took, and I'm taking that, looking this forward, is really his consistency comments are always great. And he talks about jab, 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 I think it's 4 jabs, and then right hook. And what that really is all about is that consistent value stream and putting it out there on a consistent basis. And that's an inspiration to me to say, I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to deconstruct it and rebuild it around online creation and online creators. And what does that really mean? And how does that actually look when the rubber meets the road? When you really get down to brass tacks and say, hey, this is how this works. And this is what your goal is for each of these things. I'm going to talk about that in another podcast, but really he talked about that quite a bit. And all it is, again, is consistency, consistency, consistency. That's inspirational to me. Definitely one of the inspirations that I've seen, I enjoy. I've seen them out there. Other inspirations are definitely out there. Even Hollywood has their inspirations, certainly like a Hollywood actor like Ryan Reynolds, who is very interesting in the fact that he took his acting and used it as a springboard to work his way into businesses and ownership of those businesses, and then use that to consistently push the products and get more traction and build those things up. Kind of definitely a long-term kind of thinking. That's inspirational to me to say, this isn't Rome being built in a day. And so finding that motivation out there, find someone you like, find someone you think about or think that is similar to what you're doing. And the market and the internet is so big. And they talked about this. They talk about the riches are in the niches, but the riches are also in the fact that there's so many people online looking for your content, looking for your creativity, music, video games, books, audio, you name it, TikToks, even whatever, influence, things you love, things you use, example videos, training videos. How did you do this? Working on a car. There's so much out there. You have to find the thing that inspires you and take that and make it your own. What is that you like to do? I'm taking what I like. I wrote books and I did a whole bunch of kinds of books, and they're all still out there on Amazon. And I don't want to write books anymore. but I love podcasting now even better. And so I'm shifting into that. My inspiration was the other podcasters that are out there talking about business, talking about marketing. They're really fun. And it's interesting because they're similar to like what a radio program, but you can't get a radio program like you can get podcasts. It's amazing what you can get in the podcasts. So what is the stimuli? What are the activities that spark your creativity? Is it a nature walk? Could be something else entirely different. Could be other, like I said, other influence, other online creators, influencers, and so on and so forth. But it could be nature walks, art, conversations with people. Do you talk to your mom? Does she encourage you? Does she inspire you to do something? Those are the things that can happen. And taking a deliberate approach to go find that and go harness it and say, you know, when I talked to this person, when I did this, man, I really was felt inspired to go and do my work and do what I like to do. I keep calling it work, but if you really enjoy it, it's not work. It's fun. So hopefully you can find your motivation and your fun. But I want to comment on motivation just a little bit as a bonus item here after number 7. I've got a whole nother podcast to do about the other 7 items. There's a lot of research out there about this, but let me talk a little bit about this. I'm going to hit on this again next episode, but I'm going to say this, popular or not, but discipline is a greater power than motivation. Motivation is based on inspiration, and that's great. And if you have that inspiration, like I just talked about, motivation's awesome and it will carry you through. But discipline and consistency, discipline, routine, right? That's actually more powerful than motivation. You can always count on discipline. If you're self-disciplined and you're good at being self-disciplined and you have your routine set up and you've turned them into habits. Habits, that's another good one. There's a ton of research about creating habits. And I'm not great at creating habits either, except for certain things like this that I really love. The discipline, habits, consistency, those things are all tied together and they are a greater power than motivation. Motivation's great. If you have both, you're going to win because you're going to put out some really great stuff. So I wanted to throw that out there. That's a little teaser for our next episode. But I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I really think the 7 things that I talked about here, if you take one of them away and start doing it or trying it, I think you're going to win. So to recap, number 1, set a clear intention. Number 2, create a conducive environment. Number 3, establish a routine. Number 4, engage in rituals. I love this one. You see sports people, sports athletes do this all the time. What's the ritual of a baseball player when he gets to the plate? Watch that. See what they do, and you're going to see that every time a certain batter gets to the plate, they will do the same thing every time. That's a pre-swing ritual. And you can be a high-powered online creative athlete as well. Overcome your fear. Number 5, you can overcome your fear of failure. Failure's okay. It just inspires you to learn. 6, start with small steps. Break it down. I think a new podcast that I'm going to probably, not a new podcast, but another podcast I'll probably do is really the idea of project management light. Ooh, that sounds really businessy, but you know what? The basics of project management, extremely helpful. And you can leverage your own work or work on your own things and leverage project management light for your own work and win. Inspiration triggers, number 7. Find your inspiration. Hopefully that'll trigger you to be motivated and do your work and really enjoy it. So there you go. That's the first 7. We've got a whole bunch more to go through, another 7 in part 2. So stay tuned for that one. It'll be dropping sometime soon. I really hope you enjoyed these today. Show notes are going to have a summary of what we talked about and some things with the data that's in there as well. I really hope that you go check it out at selfpubempire.com/podcast, or just go to the homepage. There's links there as well. Check out all the cool stuff that's on that website too. Once again, I have and will be editing this podcast with resound.fm. It's a fantastic tool. If you want to check that out, go to selfpubempire.com/resound and see how I use it. It's really awesome. I very much enjoy it. Thank you, Resound FM. It's fantastic. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope that this helps you and every day and all the time be leveraged to inspire yourself and be motivated and go from posts to profit. See you next time. Hey, congratulations. You just listened to another episode of the Self Pub Empire podcast. I really hope you found something inspiring, useful, and actionable for your own entrepreneurial and business aspirations. Let's keep connecting as solopreneurs, authors, and online creators of all kinds. For more information, how-tos, great tools, and show notes for the show, head over to selfpubempire.com/podcast. Until next time, let's continue moving from posts to profit.